Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets go through some ups, then some downs, plenty of injuries, and plenty of trade chatter leading up to this year's deadline. I'll break down all that and more after the theme music. What is up, Nets world? We're back here on the Believe in Nets podcast on the Believe Podcast Network. I'm your host, Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. And if you do not already, go subscribe to Believe in Nets wherever you get your podcasts. Also, go subscribe to my YouTube channel at Erik Slater NBA. If you enjoy this video and my content, like it, leave a comment, and please subscribe if you do not already. That all goes a long way. But on today's episode, going to be talking about a lot of Nets trade chatter and trade intel with Hoopshype's Michael Scotto, who just put out a good piece and always has great intel on everything going on around the league. But before we get to that, I want to break down some of the recent developments surrounding the Nets. The Nets had an eventful road trip, and then they came back home, and they've gone through a lot of injuries. They lost Cam Thomas to a hamstring strain. He's out for an extended period, and it just looked like maybe the tank and the wheels were starting to go in that direction. They lost 3 straight. They had a successful road trip. Then they lost 3 straight, lost 2 in a row to the Orlando Magic, one of which was competitive, and then went to Chicago on the back end of a back-to-back and got blown out in the second half of the game against the Bulls. But then they come back last night at home and they win an absolute rock fight, a dog fight, 99-90 against the Indiana Pacers. And now getting to the point where it's just difficult to evaluate where this Nets team is in terms of where the front office and management wants to go, the on-court product, which direction it's going to go. It seems like every turn, every time, it seems like this team, the wheels are going to fall off, or the injuries are going to be too much for them to surmount, or the schedule is getting too difficult. They find a way to just keep their head above water and stay around that 500. And they're now, that win brought them to 10-13. They're on a 36-win pace, and it's getting to the point, while I think that, I've said this several times now, probably the third time I'm saying this on the podcast, I think it's going to start to regress and they're going to start losing some games. They just play so hard on a nightly basis that it's tough to, depend on that happening. They're also so deep that it's tough to depend on that happening. That's really the two things that it's come down to, are the depth and just them wanting it more, which sounds cliche, but it's really true about this team under Jordi Fernandez. They play harder than the other team on nearly a nightly basis. Like last night was a great example of it against an Indiana Pacers team that's struggling offensively. The Nets are also struggling mightily offensively without Cam Thomas and amidst some other injuries. Over their last 4 games, the Nets are 27th in offensive rating. They're averaging 98 points on 42% shooting. Their three-point rate is way down. They're attempting 34 per game. It was 41 before Thomas went down. They're also not shooting well on those 34 attempts. So all of that against an Indiana Pacers team is also struggling, and they just find a way to gut out this win. They were down 21 points. The Pacers came back to tie it in the fourth quarter, and then the Nets immediately answered with a 10-1 run led by reserves like Ben Simmons, Shake Milton, Trendon Watford, Day'Ron Sharpe. That is just a testament to the depth of this team. And, it has been led by the veterans. Like, I'm going to talk about Cam Johnson briefly. I've already talked about Dennis Schroeder ad nauseum, all the great things he's done this season. I've touched on Dorian Finney-Smith, who's been sidelined by an ankle injury. But in this game last night, Cam Johnson shoots 7 of 13 from 3, I think it was, or 8 of 13 from 3. Did not make it 2 in this game. It was all from the 3-point line, had a team high 26 points. And, Cam's at a point now where he's playing like one of the best 3-and-D wings in the league. He's at 18.5 points per game, and he's shooting 43% from 3 on 7.6 attempts per game. So a lot of this, most of this, with Cam Thomas sidelined, and even before that to a certain extent, has started with Dennis Schroeder and Cam Johnson. Have been the guys who are leading this team. Obviously, Thomas was leading the team in scoring, and what he's done goes without saying. But those two guys, in his absence, and even before that, had played a massive role in this team performing above expectations. And Cam Johnson is getting to the point, we're going to talk about it with Scotto, but his trade value is just through the roof relative to where it was last season when he was battling a litany of injuries and he was just performing well below what people expected him to when the Nets signed him to that $40 or $95 million contract last offseason, or the offseason before this past offseason. So the trade value is ramping up. they've won several games this season because of Cam's 3-point shooting. He has, I think the number was, he has 4 games this season where he's made 6 or more 3-pointers. In his first 4 or 5 seasons combined, he did that 5 total times. So his performance this year is just so far above what he's done in the past, and he's been able to sustain it up to this point. And it's been, in the next 10 wins, you could say 5 or 6 of them are Cam Johnson's 3-point shooting was the biggest part of the Nets getting those wins. So that's been massive. And then the reserves, like I touched on those guys who closed this game last night. Day'Ron Sharpe has come back and helped. But even before that, like Tyrese Martin stepping in for that Phoenix win and shooting 8 of 10 from 3, a game nobody saw coming. That was, I think, a little bit of luck obviously involved in that, but it's just an example of this next man up. On that entire road trip, that was the case. And then now you got a guy like Shake Milton, I think is a great example, who was out of the rotation to start the year. The Nets have had some injuries with Thomas sideline. They need more on-ball creation in the second unit, and Shake Milton has come in his last 7 games. Shake Milton's at like 12 points and 3.5 assists per game on 49% shooting from the field and 44% from 3. So his ability to come on, like this is a guy, Shake Milton, who was the 12th, 13th man on this team entering the season. And he's coming in this games for a team that's supposed to be tanking, and he's putting in high-level performances. Like he's averaging double digits on close to 50% shooting and 44% shooting from 3. Like that is not 12th, 13th man level production on a tanking team. So that's just a microcosm of the depth and the degree to which this Nets team was just overlooked entering the season in terms of the guys that they have on the roster, all the way down the roster, who have been, not high level, but good contributors on high level teams in the past, like Shake was in Philadelphia, and like Cam was, and like what Dorian was, and what all of these guys have done. I think it was overlooked by pretty much everybody. And I think Jordi Fernandez's impact on the team, the jolt that they would get from him, the effort that they would play with under him was also overlooked. And all of that has led to a point where the Nets are winning more games than they would expect. And it's really has led into some really interesting conversations about how general manager Sean Marks and owner Joe Tsai are going to proceed from a trade standpoint. And, does it have an impact? Does it lead them to sell harder? Does it lead them to lean into the aggressiveness? All of this stuff. Talked about all of it and more with Scotto. He had a lot of great intel on it, and he's a guy who follows the team, what's happening on the court in addition to what's happening behind the scenes. So great intel. Hope you guys enjoy the talk with him after a quick break. And I'm joined now by Hoopshype's Michael Scotto, who just wrote a piece detailing trade chatter and trade rumors surrounding just about every team in the NBA, but this is Believe in Nets. We're here to talk about the Brooklyn Nets. So Scotto, right off the bat, we checked in on this, I think, a few weeks ago, but just want to talk about your piece and broad strokes, what you've been hearing about the Nets in terms of, what some rival executives are expecting, maybe whatever you've heard on their end about. We're about 2 months out from the NBA trade season really starting to kick off. So what have you been hearing?
Hey, Eric. Yeah, I mean, for the Nets right now, I think all eyes around the league are on the Brooklyn Nets as one of expected to be the most active teams heading into the trade deadline. They've got a lot of guys that are either on expiring contracts or veterans that can help other teams that are playoff caliber teams. And when I had written my top trade candidates story for this season, I looked at the Nets up and down that roster, and I said half this team could be a total trade candidate when you look at them. So plenty of guys that we could certainly get into, and potentially a lot of action for the Brooklyn Nets, who have defied expectations to this point, hovering around the 500 mark, and at this point in the conversation for a potential play-in spot in the Eastern Conference, when many around the league thought that they would be a cellar dweller.
Yeah, Nets 10-13 after last night's win over the Indiana Pacers. They are on a 36-win pace, which is nearly double their 18.5 win projection entering the season. And it just seems like the expectation entering the year, obviously, was that the Nets were going to tank and going to be sellers. And it seems like any player on the roster could be available for trade, which is the case, maybe outside of like Noah Clowney, just because they don't know what they have in him yet. But all these guys,
the water boys on the trade block. Look, when you're this far in the rebuild, anyone is theoretically available. And I know, like, they touched on like Cam Thomas on The Athletic saying he's readily available. I think there are levels to the phrase available. But pretty much this whole team, you can make a case that anybody is available for sure, brother.
And what I want to touch on, because we talk about the expectations entering the season. You look at the roster, you say half this team could be available for trade. But now, as has been the theme through the first, 23 games of the year, they just continually are answering every blow that's thrown at them from an injury standpoint. When people think that they might fall off the wagon, they've responded and been able to win games really at every turn, almost regardless of whoever's in the lineup. Like, there's a few guys I think together that they can't stay afloat without, but like Cam Thomas is out right now. They've been able to win, 2 out of 5 games, and they're continuing to do this. And the chatter is continuing to build. They're the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference right now. Like, what direction does it go? Is Sean Marks going to panic sell? Is he going to lean into this? So, do you think that the Nets are still going to be eager sellers, approaching this trade deadline? Or do you think that this early success under Jordi Fernandez will have an impact? And the way that some of these veteran guys in particular have really performed well could impact, their desire to get rid of them?
Well, first off, Erik, this is what's interesting about the Nets before I go into their direction. They're closing games with guys like Trendon Watford, Tyrese Martin at times. And, with all due respect to those guys, around the league, people would say, well, that would appear to be almost tanking. They're not the top guys all the time, but they've had injuries and they just happen to be winning. They play hard. And in the regular season, that's what's making the difference for some of these back-to-back games. So I think some of their wins, while they've been earned, I think some of it has to do with a little bit of scheduling, and it's slightly inflated. And I think that the Nets are cognizant of that. And Erik, the biggest thing I always come back to with the Nets is you don't trade to reacquire your own first-round picks back to be this good, even though they're kind of in the middle of the pack. And I say that because you go to reacquire your own pick thinking that you're going to have a very high lottery pick. And in this draft, whether it's Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, the kid at BYU, Igor, like there are a lot of guys in this draft. Trey Johnson's emerged at Texas. There's a lot of guys that I think somewhere in that top 5 you could feel pretty good about. And right now, the Nets are outside of that range. And so I think ultimately for the Nets, they are going to look at the landscape and see if they can maybe sell high on some guys. I think that's the most prudent thing to do, because while they are winning games, it's helping showcase their players that are potential trade candidates. So on one hand, it's a good thing. On the other hand, I think if it remains on this pace, it would defeat the long-term purpose of what they were trying to do when they reacquired their own picks. Therefore, I think they're going to certainly be active in the market with a lot of their veterans and see what they can get for them.
Yeah, it sounds like you and I are aligned on this, and things that I've heard from people, across the NBA is that expectation has persisted despite this team's early success. And their success, while they've had a lot of guys step up, like you just touched on Tyrese Martin, Shake Milton, another veteran, Trendon Watford, like these guys have stepped into the lineup and performed well when the Nets have been battling injuries. But, while they have that depth, it really does come down to a lot of their success has come down to these veteran guys who a lot of people expect to be on the move. Like you look at Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Dennis Schroeder, these 3 guys, when these 3 guys are on the floor together, the Nets have a plus 12 net rating. Like they're winning their minutes substantially when those 3 guys are on the floor. And a lot of people didn't expect that entering the year, but these are guys who know how to play basketball. So if you put them in a situation where their structure and the guys around them, and they're always going to play hard, and then the guys around them are playing hard under Jordi Fernandez, they're going to win some basketball games. And I think while it's been more than some people would have expected, that's been the case early this season. So that really gets to like the conversation of, every podcast I've done so far, I've talked about, is it time to worry about the tank? Is the tank actually in danger? Like all this and all that. Like I'm at the point now where if I was a Nets fan, who is in favor of the tank, I would be worried because they've won 10 games. They're 10-13. As I said, 36 win pace. They've won throughout, all these injuries, whoever. Like I think it'll regress back to the mean somewhat, but we're at a point now where they're 8 wins up on the Washington Wizards. They're, I think, 6 or 7 wins up on the Utah Jazz. Like those teams might not win 7 or 8 games for 2 months. So it's like they're creating a lot of separation right now, which lends itself to, maybe potentially some, eagerness and urgency from Sean Marks to trade some of these guys. So let's get into those 3 guys: Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Dennis Schroeder. You had some specifics about those guys. What have you heard about them? And let's start with, who do you think out of those 3 is probably the most likely to be moved?
Sure. I mean, well, first off, I think in talking with executives and scouts around the league, I would say the guy that has the most trade value out of Cam Johnson, Dennis Schroeder, Dorian Finney-Smith, I'll probably go with Cam Johnson because
I'd go with definitely Cam Johnson. I don't think it's a question. There's no discrepancy there to me, but go on.
Yeah, I mean, look, for Cam, it's like if they can get a first round pick back, I think that's doable. But I just don't know if that's enough at this point because given his age, he's like 28 and he's got a salary that when you're in the early $20 million range, it fits within this new cap structure pretty well. He's shooting the ball better than he ever has. And when I had spoken to him recently, I asked him essentially, Cam, if management came to you and said, we could do something, but what do you want to do? What would you say? He turned around and said, I want to build this. And he loves Jordi Fernandez. He likes the direction. He thinks they have the assets, referring to those future picks to kind of, it almost sounded like retool instead of rebuild. Now, I don't necessarily know if the Nets view it that way. And obviously Cam Johnson told me, look, if he did get moved, he'd have no hard feelings. He understands it's a business. But I think the Nets can wait a little bit on him to make a decision if they choose. But I don't know how much higher his value would be because he's playing the best basketball of his career with Jordy and shooting the lights out of the ball. Now, Dennis Schroeder is interesting to me because he's also shot the ball really well from three-point range compared to his career numbers. And when you look at Dennis, you know what you're going to get. Like if you run him in a lot of pick and rolls, you saw what he did with the German national team, that he can be very effective. But in the NBA, he really hasn't been afforded that opportunity. So if you're the Nets, to the fans that are maybe wondering about the whole tank thing, my thought has always been if you really wanted to make a dent in this team, I think trading Dennis Schroeder would be a huge dent. Like I'm talking a bumper getting smashed into a Mercedes because he has such a usage rate for them and the ball's in his hands a lot. And I think if you take him out, sure, you could theoretically run the offense through Ben Simmons, but Ben has had injury trouble before, and he can only play, I think at this point, effectively a limited number of minutes, maybe up to 25. Once you start getting into that 30-plus range, it's going to be tougher for him to stay healthy. So to me, I think that's the key piece. And when I spoke to executives, they felt that Dennis Schroeder is a guy that can get multiple second-round picks. Obviously, the range fluctuates, but in general, that was the consensus. Maybe it turns into something like Royce O'Neal last year. Food for thought. And then lastly, Dorian Finney-Smith, a 3-and-D guy that is playing similar to when he did when Dallas made the Western Conference Finals. I think it was 2021. He's shooting above 40% for three. It's just he's got to stay on the floor. But the one thing scouts and execs tell me is Dorian's the guy defensively that's guarding everybody. He's accepting that challenge, and people are noticing that along with his three-point shooting. Now, he's got the player option next year, which is twofold, right? I mean, he could opt out and try to do a bigger deal, but if he goes to a team that's a contender, he can opt in and then try to do an extension off of that depending on their cap situation. So there is some flexibility that teams are looking at with Dorian and his play and contract that I think are going to make him an interesting trade candidate as well. And similarly, those same executives and scouts said that he can get potentially multiple second-round picks as well at this point in the season.
So there's a lot to unpack there, a lot of which I agree with. What you said about Dennis Schroeder, like if you were trying to make a dent, like a tractor trailer hitting a BMW or whatever you said back then, you would trade Dennis Schroeder. And I literally wrote an article after the Nets got blown out. I think it was the first Orlando matchup that they had on Friday. Mm-hmm. That if that game was a good example, that if you were to trade Dennis Schroeder, especially with Cam Thomas out, like once Cam Thomas comes back in, he'll do some of those things. But in terms of the facilitation, like if you're looking at guys who are dribble, pass, shoot threats on the Nets, it's really only Dennis Schroeder. But I will caveat, I still stand by that. But, like last night, Dennis scores 4 points on 1 of 7 shooting or whatever he was. And then Cam Johnson's the guy who steps in and hits 7 threes, and they win the game because of him. And they have won a lot of games this season because of Cam Johnson's 3-point shooting. So
one day we're going to look back at the Tyrese Martin 30-point explosion. Like if the Nets, are 1 game ahead of another team in the lottery standings, there are going to be fans that look back at that game and go, really? Like that was the game that, and I mean, great for Tyrese. And I understand. The thing with the Nets and Jordy real quick, Erik, is like they're fostering this. It's not called the culture anymore. It's the standard. That's the new key term. And if the standard is competition and things like that, no player has ever gotten on a court trying to half-ass it. It's never been done because they're all competing for jobs. They don't want somebody to take their job. So obviously when a guy like Tyrese Martin gets a shot, he's going to try to light it up like Times Square on New Year's Eve. And God bless, he did. He was as effective as Con Edison with his 30 points. Good for him. But big picture, I think the Nets, it's just incredible. It's like if I told you at the end of games that their lineups would have guys like Tyrese Martin, Trendon Watford. And again, like I have respect for these guys. But comparatively to the rest of the NBA and the average casual fan, they go, oh, okay, they're tanking.
Yeah, 100%.
But it's like Jordy could coach like, I don't know.
I get what you're saying. I think
he's getting these guys off the 92nd Street Y, and like they're lighting it up, and they're winning. Like the one thing we've learned, Jordy Fernandez is an outstanding coach, and they at least have that as a core piece for the future for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's a combination of things. There's been some luck, some shooting variance that has bounced their way. I think that Phoenix game was a prime example. I think that whole West Coast run, that Sacramento game, the Golden State win, and the Phoenix win, they were averaging like 23-point makes a game, which is unsustainable. Like they're a good shooting team, and that's how they've won a lot early this season is by winning the math game at the 3-point line, which is why I said Cam Johnson has been such a big part of it. So there's been some luck from that end. There's also been Jordy Fernandez running a good offensive system that has gotten guys like Cam Johnson comfortable. And then there's been the hustle factor, as you alluded to. This is a team where, the culture, the standard, the Brooklyn grit, all the things that a lot of people, including myself, roll their eyes at a lot because they are just so overused, like ad nauseum in the NBA.
So on and so forth.
It's been accurate for this Nets team. Like this Nets team, outside of like there's a couple of games that I can think of. They got blown out by the Celtics. The second half of their Chicago loss before last night's win was really bad. And after both of those performances, Jordy Fernandez laid into them. Like he did not hold back. Like he said, this was, poor. It didn't meet our standards. I told the guys that the effort was unacceptable, and guys, wearing this uniform are going to have to, perform and put in higher effort, especially on the defensive end of the floor. So they bought into that stuff. And I think last night was a very good example of them winning a gritty game by just wanting it more and out hustling a team, because that was an ugly offensive game. Like really nobody had it going except for Cam Johnson. Like Tyrese Halliburton earned the name Hallibrick from the guy above press row, and that whole Pacers team just
that guy was. I know everybody talks about Mr. Whammy, but there was a guy in the 200 section every time that Halliburton touched the ball.
It was at least 50 times throughout the game.
And his voice, like this guy must have had the best tee in the arena, because this guy's voice just never wavered.
Yeah, and and I said after the game, I was joking that I credit that guy with the Nets' defensive performance. I think he had to be a Knicks fan because Obi Toppin was out there, and I heard him yell, Obi, like, New York still loves you. So I think he's a Knicks fan just putting on like a generational hate watch performance at Barclays Center last night. He might have been so spiteful that he drove, or took the subway to Brooklyn for that game just to see Halliburton and get in those yells. Yeah. But it worked. And the bottom line is the Nets down the stretch of that game, they blew a 20-point lead, and then the Pacers come back to tie it, and then they re-separate themselves purely by hustle. Like the lineup that they had out there was not a lineup that should be able to play together and function together and score together. They had Trendon Watford, Day'Ron Sharpe, and Ben Simmons on the floor, who are good players and versatile, not exactly a group that you'd expect to light it up offensively. So
Right.
it worked, and I think that's just a testament to them hustling. Now, the point that I want to get back to is I talked about how Dennis Schroeder I saw as being a guy who, if you traded him, would just be a massive hit to this team and, probably push them back in the direction of the tank. I thought more so than any other player on the team. I'm now starting to consider that Cam Johnson might be equally, if not more, in that area. You might disagree. I'll let you get out your take in a second. But Cam Johnson, there are these nights. They put out the stat last night. Cam Johnson this season has 4 or 5 games where he's made 6 or more threes. In his first 5 NBA seasons, he did that 5 times in 5 seasons combined. So he's at a point right now where he's literally winning them games. Like there's 4 or 5 games, 4 or 5 wins out of their 10 that you could, not solely, but you could say Cam Johnson played the biggest role in by having 24 points 18 points just off of 3-pointers. So he's a guy who, if you traded either of those guys or both of them, this team is going to take a massive step back. So let's talk a little bit about this. Or do you have an opinion on that Cam versus Dennis?
Well, who's getting him the ball? It's Dennis Schroeder.
Well,
Ben
Simmons can get him the ball too. Ben Simmons wants to pass Cam Johnson the ball more than he wants to do anything else in life. He would rather pass Cam Johnson the ball than, eat dinner tonight. So there's him, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Go on.
No, I mean, I understand. I guess you can make the argument for sure, but I think, okay, but the difference I would say is and I know Ben still has a ton of assists throughout the year. For a guy that doesn't shoot the ball, like I would think a team would just sag off him completely and not worry about him. But with Schroeder, it's like, to me, here's the thing, and I wrote this in the piece too. Schroeder's the alpha voice in that locker room. I think from a leadership perspective, you lose him, that's also a damaging blow. But we'll see with the Nets. I mean, I get the point on Cam. Obviously, he's scoring, but who's to say that like Tyrese Martin won't start shooting threes? Like, I know you're going to laugh and be like, come on. But
Scotto, I'll be the one to say that Tyrese Martin is not going to shoot threes at the clip that Cam Johnson is at right now.
He's shooting like 50% from 3.
Yeah, all right. He's shooting.
Listen, I'm not saying like big picture.
Yeah,
like,
but
obviously.
Let me get this
But
out.
somebody like Jordy will find somebody. Look at the shots they're getting in the offense. I promise you, Eric, I could hit 3 corner threes in Jordy Fernandez's offense. I promise you. I've done it and you've seen it.
I agree with you on a lot of things, but this Tyrese Martin, he's shooting 17 of 33 from 3. 10 of his 3-point makes came
I'm using
in one
him
game.
as an example. They'll
I know,
find
I'm
somebody.
saying, but like 10 of his threes came in one game, which was like a black swan performance. Not that Tyrese isn't a good shooter. Tyrese is a good shooter, back to his Rhode Island, UConn days and what he did with the Minnesota Timberwolves G League team. But he's not going to shoot the ball at the level of Cam Johnson. There's not a person on this team. And frankly, this season, there's few guys in the entire NBA who are shooting the ball at the level of Cam Johnson.
So you trading him for a first-round pick? You're okay with that?
It depends on where the first round pick is. Entering the season, myself, I think, I don't want to speak for you, but and a lot of other people, I think, would have said you definitely trade him for a first round pick.
Well, because, I got people in my mentions that are like, whoa, we got to hold him for multiple firsts. And
well, that shows how the tables turn, because last season when he was hurt and when he wasn't performing anywhere near this level, people would have been like, we can get a first round pick for Cam Johnson. Like, I'll pay for his carry on at the airport. But now he's playing at this level, and fairly the expectations and, the return has shifted. So that's something that I want to talk about. First, before we get to that, something that I do think is interesting is the leadership that you touched on with Dennis Schroeder. And I'm curious, particularly with Cam Johnson and Schroeder, because we were arguing which one would have a bigger impact, if you traded them off. And honestly, it doesn't matter. The bottom line is they're both, if you traded either of them or both of them, it's going to be a massive hit to their ability to compete, which will help their tank. Right. But the leadership thing I think is interesting, because the Nets are, from what I've heard, not viewing this as like a 3-4 year rebuild. Like, they do want to get better in the near future, it seems like. And having guys like that, and even regardless of that, having guys like that, as you bring in these young players, they're going to have 4 first-round picks in this coming draft. Whether or not they make all those picks is to be determined, but there is a concrete value to having guys like Dennis Schroeder and Cam Johnson. And you're seeing that play out on the floor with how hard this entire team is playing with Dennis being the guy, as you properly pointed out, that they've all pointed to. Like, this guy guards 94 feet every game. He's, playing defense. He sets the tone on both ends of the floor. So my question to you, your opinion, do you think that leadership, even if trading these guys would help the tank and it might be good for their value, do you think that leadership and them kind of potentially being guys who could usher some young guys into a next era could be a factor in, or a deterrent in, Sean Marks wanting to trade these guys?
Well, I think with Dennis, a couple things come to mind. Number one, I would say he's in a contract year. The Nets have a ton of cap space. He's obviously going to want to stay there, try to get as much money as he can. He's got one of the best roles he's ever had in his career. So I could see from his standpoint why he'd want to be there. I think what then becomes interesting is for Dennis, for example, like, what if the Nets somehow end up with Dylan Harper? Then how does his role change? Is he the same leader, or is he going to be disappointed that maybe his minutes would take a hit and they'd be prioritizing Dylan Harper's development long-term in a theoretical scenario? I think that's what you got to look at, if you're Sean. I think anybody at the end of a contract is trying to always be on their best behavior and put their best foot forward. I don't know if Dennis goes to a playoff caliber team and is a backup, is he still considered as much of a leader as he is here, where he's clearly the alpha voice in that locker room? Like Cam Johnson, Cam Thomas, and Nick Claxton, that's not their personality. It's not a knock. It's just the reality. Mm-hmm. So, I think that's where it becomes interesting for Sean. Is it worthwhile to him? My thing with Dennis is like, if the Nets can get a first round pick for him, sure. But I don't know if
they're not going to. I don't think.
No, I know. I'm just being theoretically. So it's like, if you got multiple second round picks, what's your priority? If you're trying to, bottom out and make your own pick better, whether it's for trades and things like that in the greater good, then toodaloo.
Well, that would be the priority. I mean, if we're talking about a guy like Dennis, unless they have a desire to re-sign him and keep that, voice.
But even if you do, it's a short-term thing. Like, Dennis is in his early 30s now.
Yeah, but you could sign him, say they sign him to a 2-year deal or a 2+1 or
possible,
a 1+1. That's still, they're going to be drafting, 3 guys, say, in this rookie class. They already have guys like Clowney and Whitehead and whatever. And if they want Dennis and that alpha, that veteran voice, that guy's who's setting the tone, that guy who, as you wrote, is an extension of Jordi Fernandez, if they want to maintain that, keeping him on a short-term deal, they in their eyes, and I see the logic, could provide concrete value in terms of mentoring and ushering those young players into the next era, which I think could make sense. Now, you say, you get 2 second-round picks or whatever. The second-round picks are just gravy at that point with Dennis. Like, trading him is just going to have such a concrete value to improving their tank, which I don't like. I hate to be the guy who, when this team is playing and having fun and, all this stuff, who's like, you got to trade these guys. You got to tank. And there's a lot of people in my mentions on my last video who are angry about it and disagreeing with me. And that's totally fine. But like you said, you don't trade.
It depends on your perspective. If you're looking at the greater good, I think that's more the avenue.
It's whether you're taking a short or long-term view. But Scotto, as you pointed out at the top, Sean Marks played he paid a 150, 200% markup on those on his picks, trading those Suns picks to Houston to get back his own picks. He traded like 4 for 2. So you don't do that unless you're trying to maximize these picks. Like, they knew what the goal was entering this season. The goal was this season to bottom out, to get a chance at these generational players at the top of the draft, like a Cooper Flagg, like a Dylan Harper, like an Ace Bailey. Like, that was the goal. And they're not accomplishing that goal right now. Now, in the process of them not accomplishing that goal, are there valuable byproducts, like the team establishing a culture and Jordi Fernandez separating himself as a good coach? Absolutely. But you could do all that stuff and you could still try to bottom out now. And this is a 1-year thing, you could say, where, just holding on to these guys.
I'd argue too, given the picks.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
and 2026, I think AJ, I believe you pronounce it the band, so I forget how but that kid who's like 6'10", and some people think he's better than Cooper Flagg.
Yeah,
from NBA executives I've talked to. So
A lot of people think that. Yeah. But getting out ahead of our skis going to 2026. But what I'm saying is trading these guys like Schroeder and Johnson, like Schroeder in particular, I think would just have such a concrete value to their tank. So it really comes down to, what are you prioritizing more between the two things I said?
Mm-hmm.
On the end of keeping him would be having this veteran guy, this guy who is a tone setter, a culture setter, who could usher in this group of young players and really show them what it means to be a pro and the right way to do things. Are you prioritizing that, or are you prioritizing trading him and maximizing your draft pick on the other end? So that's kind of the push and pull. Where I stand on it, I don't really, like, I'm not going to minimize the value of having a leader like that in the locker room full of young guys, but I don't even think it's a question that the goal this year should be to maximize their draft pick. So with Schroeder, that's where it's at. I think that I think it's very realistic that they could keep him and they could maybe try to look to extend him on a short-term deal. But I think that there would be a lot of value to trading him, obviously. Cam Johnson is a really interesting guy. I think even more interesting because he has 2 more years on his contract. He's the guy who is young enough who he could theoretically be with the Nets and be playing until he's like 32, 33 and going into like this next era of the team if they wanted to. And he's also the guy that has the most value right now. Like, I think a first round pick is absolutely what they would get for him at the minimum right now. Like, they're not trading him for anything less than that. Now we're talking about additional stuff on that, another pick, or, other young contracts instead of just worth the salary fillers, stuff like that. So, where do you stand on Cam J in terms of them being able to move him? And do you think that, because in my perspective, this is the time, like he's healthy. He's playing the best basketball of his career right now. His value is never going to be higher unless you're absolutely sold on him being into the next era and you're that high on him. I just think that you have to move him right now. But what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, you pretty much echoed what I said earlier. I think for Cam, health is the biggest thing for him. He's shooting the ball well. He's always been a good shooter, but this is a career highs and career scoring rates. I don't really see how much further it gets past this. Like, he's pretty much almost at 20 points a game. He's maybe at 18 or so. So if you want to sell high, sooner than later. But obviously, I think for the Nets, the other caveat to selling high out of that equation is always looking at a team who has a sense of urgency. And, around the league, like, I'll give you one example. I'm not saying for Cam Johnson necessarily, maybe in theory, but I don't think so. I think more just in general. If you're a team like the Sacramento Kings and you just got DeMar DeRozan and you're in the play-in kind of conversation right now, you're not where you want to be. You have a ton of stars in their prime now. There should be a sense of urgency to make this team better sooner than later. So it's about finding those teams on the market who have the sense of urgency and a slight desperation that'll give you what you want and more. The Nets did that when they traded Kevin Durant to the Suns when Matt Ishbia came, wanted to make a splash, and they got the best offer for him that they could have ever even imagined, considering prior to that, before the start of the season, the Boston Celtics were talking about Jaylen Brown and 1 first-round pick, and that was it, compared to the bevy of picks that the Brooklyn Nets got in the Durant trade, and they got McHale, who they flipped and multiplied those picks, and Cam Johnson, who remains to be seen.
Yeah, so, and I agree with you there. You want to look for teams who are desperate and potentially willing to overpay. I do think that there's another category of team that I think is in play for Johnson, and I'd say that's a team looking for the piece to put them over the top, and maybe a team that has, a surplus of picks and things to offer along those lines. I think a really interesting team is the Oklahoma City Thunder, who, are not shooting the ball great from 3 this season, but are still the best team in the Western Conference. And I think that they have obviously all the picks and more to throw into a deal. They also have matchable salaries, like they have 3 wings in Aaron Wiggins, Isaiah Joe, and Kenrich Williams, who are matchable salaries. I think Aaron Wiggins would actually have some value to a team like the Nets, a young guy who's on an outstanding contract moving forward. So they're a team. I'm going to write a piece on this soon on Johnson and potential trade suitors, but I think the Oklahoma City Thunder are a really interesting team. I think that the Orlando Magic and the Cleveland Cavaliers are 2 interesting teams. We talked about this on our last episode. In the Eastern Conference, I would say that all those teams are, could be in the mix for Cam. And you and I both gave our take. I think at this point, they're I think that it's the time to sell Cam. He's healthy. He's playing the best basketball of his career. You don't know how much longer the health or this shooting is going to last. So if he's at this level and healthy leading up to the trade deadline, I think you just have to strike while the iron's hot. Dorian Finney-Smith, we touched on him. Don't want to spend too long on him, but I think he might be the most, likely of these guys to get traded because I just think that he has, they'll be able to, somebody will take him. They'll be able to get some value for him. And, I don't think that necessarily he, provides the same thing that Dennis does. And he doesn't have the kind of question of being into the future the way that Cam does. Do you agree with that?
More or less, I agree with your assessment. I think DFS, when you look at his age and productivity and playoff teams that could look for a guy like him, yeah, I think it's just if the Nets want to move him for multiple seconds at this point or not, or if they wait a little bit closer to the deadline.
Yeah, and that could look very similar to what we saw with Royce O'Neal. You touched on it earlier. They got salary fillers and 3 second-round picks to a team like the Phoenix Suns, who could still be looking for more wing help. Like, who knows? But that's just an example of where we could go with that. Before we round this out, anybody else because we said the Nets are open for business. It's not just those guys. Like, pretty much anybody on this team is available. Yeah. Anybody else that you think will be in that mix?
I mean, I think big picture, you got to look at teams are looking out there for backup centers around the league, whether it's the Lakers, even the Clippers a little bit. Memphis for a time certainly had. I think you got to look at Day'Ron Sharpe for the Nets, a guy who's just coming back now from injury, getting his wind back and getting in a rhythm. For the Nets, they've got Noah Clowney. They've obviously got Claxton under contract. For Sharpe, he's going to be eligible for restricted free agency this summer. How much do they value him at this point? I think he's a guy that certainly other teams are monitoring, as I have reported. And so I think for Day'Ron, if he kind of catches fire a little bit here, that could kind of move the needle. He's on an affordable salary that if you trade for him now will fit for your cap for most teams, even if they're playoff contenders that are worrying about the tax or not. So I think he's an interesting name to watch for sure. Obviously, if Bojan Bogdanovic comes back and is healthy and they showcase him a little bit, maybe you can get a second-round pick for him if he wants to go to a playoff contender and be a guy off the bench towards the latter stages of his career as well.
Yeah, I think Day'Ron's a really interesting name because he's a guy who I've really grown to like his game over these last, this last season, and then what he's shown in the first couple of games this year. He's obviously one of the better rebounders in the NBA. He was second in the NBA in rebounding percentage last season behind only Andre Drummond, who is the self-proclaimed best rebounder in the history of basketball.
Historically, one of the best.
So, you have that aspect of it. And then there's the growing areas of his skill set. He's been much better defending the pick and roll. He's flashing some of that short roll playmaking. He took 2 threes and hit a 3 last night. If he could start to do that, there's some real conversations about Day'Ron Sharpe. But I do think that he's really interesting as a trade candidate because Sean Marks traditionally has liked to kind of backfill the center spot through the draft and keep those guys on rookie contracts. It's a good way to save money. And he's been very effective in picking centers between Jared Allen, Nick Claxton, now Day'Ron Sharpe. Noah Clowney, not a center, but a front court piece who looks promising. He's shown that ability. And it's a question of, do the Nets want to spend a portion of their 2025 cap space to re-sign Day'Ron, or would they rather trade him and get whatever they can get back?
He usually moves off of restricted free agents before.
Yeah, that's been
if he knows he's not going to bring you back, he'll get something for you.
So that's the idea there. But Day'Ron has shown some promising stuff, so it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out in terms of, do they want to spend that cap space on him, or do they want to get somebody else on a rookie contract in the draft? But I like Day'Ron. And Day'Ron, I don't think it's solidified, how they feel about Nick Claxton long-term. They just signed him to the contract, but nobody is penciled in as a long-term piece. If you're looking 3-4 years down the line, it would be very plausible that they might have an entirely new roster.
Any contract the Nets have given out or give out going forward, even if they keep Cam Thomas, it's going to be with the question of, is this going to be a movable contract eventually? Because they always want the optionality for it. So I agree with your assessment there.
Yeah, definitely. So we touched on a lot of stuff there. A lot of interesting trade chatters surrounding the Nets. Scotto, you followed the Nets for a long time. You've been around the fan base for a long time. Any parting thoughts, anything you want to leave Nets fans with as they go into a civil war about whether to tank or compete?
I think a lot of people compare this Nets team with the Kenny Atkinson 6 seed team, and I don't view it that way. I think the Nets have more assets for the future going forward. They have some more young pieces. And so when I look at the team, look, you found your coach, no question. I think big picture, there's a ceiling on this kind of squad right now, and it's more about the future. So I would say to fans, if they make trades and they move off some of these veterans, I would say big picture, I think it probably is going to be the right move, and it's still something I'm keeping an eye on, and so is the rest of the NBA about the Nets doing. So I would just look out for that, and in the meantime, enjoy it. It's been fun. It's fun to watch the Nets. Like, they're scrappy. They play hard. I think Jordy's got a really nice flowing offense that's allowed guys to get better. And truthfully, he's holding people accountable. He's not afraid after a game to kind of rip into the team a little bit, which I think in the NBA today is a little bit of a lost art. I think there's a little too much coddling and babying, quite frankly. And, I like it when a coach doesn't treat a guy like he's softer than Charmin toilet paper. So I'm here for it. I'm from that older school mentality. So for me, at 35, but that's my kind of mindset. So I think for the Nets, I know everybody's like, oh man, they're winning too many games. Like, I hear you, but not yet. We're getting close.
We're damn close. I mean, we're getting there, and that's the push and pull all season. Is everything you've just said there, and it's tough because when you're saying and you believe that the tank is the best path, you don't want to minimize that they are fun right now. Like, it's been a blast watching them play basketball and watching them buy into Jordy Fernandez and all that. And Scotto, we'll have you back on here, leading up to the trade deadline. I'm going to want to do a trade deadline preview with you. You're going to have more great coverage of it all along the way. So I appreciate you joining me as always, and I'll talk to you soon, man.
Thanks, brother. Sounds good. I'll see you at Barclays soon.
That does it for this episode of Believe in Nets on the Believe Podcast Network, your one-stop shop for everything happening across the sports and entertainment world. Hope you guys enjoyed the talk with Scotto. As always, just provides great stuff. And I think, me and him have a great back and forth. He's just been around the team for so long and has his finger on the pulse. So always good to get some trade breakdown, some trade chatter with him. If you guys don't already, as I said at the top, go subscribe to Believe in Nets wherever you get your podcast. Most importantly, go to YouTube, subscribe to me at Erik Slater NBA, like the video, comment on it, anything you guys can do there. You'll find all of my work on ClutchPoints.com, and you'll find all of my live game tweeting, quotes, analysis, injury updates, all that on Twitter at Erik Slater _. So go follow me there if you don't already. But Nets are getting into another stretch of the schedule where they have some difficult games coming up, and we'll see if they're able to keep this up amidst the injuries. If the offensive struggles get to be too much and they start to regress, we'll have all that. They got 3 days off now, and then they'll face the Milwaukee Bucks on Sunday. So I'll have more coverage next week and moving forward here on Believe in Nets. Talk to you guys soon.